Hello friends and fellow world builders, my name is AJ Winters and welcome back to World Builder. Today we're fleshing out the history of the Trilands. I had the absolute honour of being in a PAX panel last week where a group of epic players and myself got to play Microscope, which is basically a group world building game. I had so much fun playing it that I decided to purchase myself a copy and use the basics today to flesh out the history of the Trilands. We know a few of the details from each of the city episodes, 4, 8 and 10 if you want to go check those out. But today we're going to connect them and see how we flesh out the Trilands timeline to match up with current events now. Yes, hello you from the future in 2022. If you're watching this should hopefully meet up with the current events of the tabletop RPG game that you're watching. Not putting any pressure on myself by saying that months in advance. Roll that intro. Alright, first we start off with a big picture. For example, if we're walking into the libraries of the mining city and we open up a book to read about the history of the Trilands, it's that one sentence that summarizes the entire history. Maybe we should go with something like the road to the trade agreement. Though maybe we should also rename the trade agreement, but we'll come up with a name for that later. I think let's go with that. Next, we've got to bookend our history. So for us, that is before the Trilands became what they are to where we are now. That's easy enough. So our first part of the history is going to be before anything. So it's before the pilgrimages of the monarchy that led to the mining city. So maybe let's start with something very vague that we know is before everything, which is the War of the Gods.
Long before the stars fell from the skies and territories were divided or conquered over mountains, the gods used the lands of Aelwyn as a battleground. The devastation they left behind changed the lands forever, for good and for bad. They left behind the stone husks of the gods that fell, and an unimaginable power that would one day be tapped into by mortal man.
Alright, so now we have the War of the Gods as the beginning, and our ending we have a thriving Trilands. Now that we have our bookends, we create the history's palette. Usually you would have more players at this point and each player would add in their own set of rules. But since it's just me doing it and we're doing it in order to create a historical timeline, let's just add in the things we know for certain. So first off, we know each city has their own governing body. Yes. Secondly, we know the Trilands are their own region. Okay. And lastly, we know for certain that each city is no longer a part of a greater nation. For example, our mining city and Penarvois both came from monarchies. Now we add in our periods or events, so let's focus on the ones we do know. For example, our mining city Orsten was founded after the great pilgrimages to the glowing mountains. So that would be very early on and in its own era. The Ratu Tour is what I've named the pilgrimages. Ratu meaning journey and tour meaning soul, your soul journey. So let's add that in. The people who ventured out for their Ratu tour were from a monarchy that no longer exists. I also like the idea that the city was gifted to a princess and passed down from daughter to daughter. Maybe the monarchy that this city originated from no longer stands, but the tradition of princess to princess still does. So two things we are certain of. One, that there was a period before the rise of Orsten where the monarchy still existed, and two, that that monarchy eventually fell. Also, I'm going to take two name suggestions that we were given, one from Super KJ and one from Banjek, to name our monarchy Venenfell.
The southern lands of Aelwyn were the most affected after the War of the Gods, but from the death and destruction rose the matriarchal monarchy known as Venenfell, with a deeply religious culture living their lives dedicated to the gods, in fear that another war would spark if they didn't.
And we'll also add in the fall of Venenfell. And we'll put that one as dark. And within the monarchy of Venenfell, we will add an event, which is the yearly Ratu Tour. I think that this mining city was here long before the other two cities of the Trilands. I think maybe it was a location for a religious pilgrimage or something, because every now and then during the seasonal changes of the year, the mountains would almost glow.
The queens of Venenfell sent out their men to find the gods' landmarks left behind from the War of the Gods. But when they returned, they'd only praise the glowing mountains and how powerful it made them feel. From then on, a yearly journey to those mountains was insisted upon for anyone who had recently celebrated their 20th year. The Ratu Tour would test them and make them strong in both body and soul, which we now know is how the city of Austin was founded.
The two things we also need to add after the fall of Venenfell would be the establishment of our river city and Penarvois. And we don't know which one comes first, as both of them had some sort of technology. However, I'm going to say that Penarvois came first and then the river city,
because we initially stated that they were a fully established people who moved to the converging rivers for the power of their moon deity.
This is looking interesting. I like this. Okay, then we need the establishment of the trade agreement. And that would be after those two cities existed. So an interesting point. Do we add in a dark period where the three cities did not get on? Because very unlikely was it that two civilizations moved into the same area and did not kick up a fuss with the city of Austin, especially since they were thriving and working in magical tech using the stone. There would have been some sort of disagreement of territory. This is an interesting point though, because each of the cities is exactly 1 to 2 days travel away from each other. That's not very far when it comes to territory. So I think that is between, is it after? I think Penarvois came, I think here's my plan. I'm not doing full sentences. Looking at this timeline, I'm gonna say that some sort of territory war or some sort of territory disagreement went on between the river city and Austin. And I say that because I think the people of Penarvois are quite peaceful. However, the clashing of religious views between Austin and their stone god and the river city and their moon deity might have an issue. Since all three cities utilize the same rivers and two of the rivers that flow out of Austin and Penarvois meet up at the river city, there would definitely need to be some sort of amicability between the three cities. How does that transform into a trade agreement? Aquaponics. Bear with me. Aquaponics is using
a system of aquaculture in a cycle in which plants are fertilized by water from the fish and fish are given nutrients and purified water from the plants.
So the use of the farming system of the River Pen would actually nourish the river that flows down towards the river city. Their Triton trout would feed on the nutrients that are fed in by the plants and vegetables that the citizens of Penarvois grow. It's its own ecosystem. That's pretty cool. They have parts of the trade agreement. This isn't even relevant to the history. I just came up with this on the spot. They have certain things in the trade agreement that stipulate as to what types of things they grow in the River Pen, because some sort of plants might be harmful to the fish that the fishermen fish in the river city. Yeah, that makes sense, right? That was a full sentence. I think that was a full sentence. So let's add that in. Where do I add that in, AJ? I don't know. Oh, the establishment of the trade agreement. That would make more sense, wouldn't it? The city of Penarvois agree to only plant certain fruits and vegetables in the river pen to feed the fish of the river city. I've just had a very lovely suggestion from behind the camera to name the trade agreement the Accords. And I really like that. So how do I edit? How do I edit you? There we go. The establishment of the Accords. We need to work out what each city gains from the Accords and what they agree to in order to be combined into one region. For example, I think with the city of Austin that they have to give over the magical stone that they mine. If they're experimenting on that magical tech, they're going to share it with the other two. But maybe that's later on in the Accords. That is not something they offer up willingly until the 3 cities are established as a region. So let's put that in the thriving Trilands. The city of Austin agreed to provide the yet unnamed magical stone to the other cities. So, I think the other thing we need to discuss is that Penavwa rose against their own empire. The citizens of this farming city came to this land with an empire of some sort, and over time they actually rebelled from the empire's systems and became a place for people to make a name, a living, and a coin for themselves. So maybe there's some sort of revolution against the emperor. I like this idea a lot because it means that we get to dabble into an emperor of some kind later on down the track. Maybe they're on a different continent entirely. I like that. Ooh, so much room to play and potentially more map making. You know how I like to throw things off my balcony. Okay, I think that they would have had to send produce back to the mainland. If we're making this emperor on a different continent, we can follow some of history's favorite revolutions based on trade. So, maybe following A Bug's Life, because you know how much I love that movie, maybe there was a drought and they didn't have enough supplies to send back to the Empire and still survive. But the Empire didn't care.
Where's my food?
Maybe the only reason they survived was because of the city of Austin. The citizens came together and helped the other nation, regardless of religious views and/or previous disputes. They helped a nation who was starving when their empire didn't. And that is why they started the revolution and why Austin fought with them against the empire. The drought.
I, Ilidia, Princess of Austin, accept your plea. We find ourselves similar for once in that our independence must be fought and won. My city is open to your people until the rain falls, and if your emperor demands your death in his servitude, it is my promise that it shall be his death at my hand on the battlefield. To the 13 houses of Penavwa, be at peace. May the gods watch over you in the next days to come.
This tells us a lot about the Trilands, especially if there's history between Penavwa and Austin long before the River City shows up. That means that within these trade agreements there is rich history on which to dwell upon. Do we add in any sort of war against a different region that unites the Trilands completely? Do they establish their own guard, for example? Because each city has their own governing body, they might have their own way of discipline, their own policing system. But do the 3 cities work together in terms of an army? I think they would have to. Okay, I'm adding in another war. We're doing it. War against Crestfell? Ooh. No. Maybe? No. Okay, here's my thought process. Crestfell is a region that is directly south to the Trilands. Crestfell is a monarchy, or at least that's what I've kind of dabbled in my thought process of. Maybe Crestfell and Venenfell originate from the same place. Maybe they're sisters or something. Potentially, during the territory wars, Crestfell saw an opportunity to invade and carve out a little bit more territory for themselves. So the 3 cities of the Trilands banded together. Regardless of what they were going through, they fought against Crestfell. And that is when they truly became the Trilands.
Crestfell was dim-witted and selfish, and did not understand what they had gotten themselves into. What they thought was a vulnerability of 3 individual cities fighting over territory was inevitably their downfall, because in fact, their petty invasion became the catalyst for the greatest region in Aelwyn. Our 3 great cities united and became an unstoppable force, a beacon for advancement in magical tech like no other. Go back to your small vineyards, Crestfell, and leave the magic to your betters.
Yeah, this is a really good timeline so far, and answers a few of the pending questions that I had after each of the city episodes. This really ties them together, and I'm starting to see a really clear picture of the Trilands. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode too. Next week, we're going to dive into myths and legends. I'm very excited. I'm going to be using the Story Engine deck and creating a few different legends that live within the Trilands and the surrounding regions. But until then, please like this video and hit subscribe and follow all the socials so that you can stay up to date with all the videos that are coming out. If you want to be part of world building discussions, then head on over to our Discord, or if you want to be part of special voting and behind the scenes content, like for example naming our mining city Austin, then join our Patreon. But thank you so much for joining us today and for all the amazing support that you have given me on this journey. I'm so excited to continue on with more exciting stuff ahead, so stay tuned. But for now, I'll see you next week.